The scream, a high, thin thread of terror, barely pierced the torrential rain battering the ancient stones of Mashakul Castle. It was a sound Eloise had learned to dread, a sound that clawed at the edges of her sanity. She pressed herself further into the damp straw of her makeshift bed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Around her, the other women, a huddled mass of misery, offered no comfort, only the shared silence of those awaiting their turn. Eloise was 17, though she felt ancient, aged beyond her years by the horrors she had witnessed within these walls. She had been brought here, like the others, lured by promises of work, of a better life than the grinding poverty of the surrounding villages. Gilles de Rais, the Baron, the hero of Orléans, needed maidservants, cooks, seamstresses, so the whispers went. Whispers that dissolved into screams within the castle shadow. Eloise remembered the journey vividly. The sun-drenched fields, the hopeful chatter of the other girls, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses pulling the wagon towards Mashakul. She had clutched her small bundle of belongings, envisioning clean clothes, regular meals, perhaps even a bit of coin to send home to her ailing mother. Her dreams, like those of the others, had been brutally extinguished. The reality of Mashakul was a nightmare woven from fear, isolation, and the ever-present threat of Gilles de Rais. He was a phantom, rarely seen, but his presence permeated every corner of the castle, a miasma of dread that choked the air. His men, hulking brutes with eyes that seemed to absorb the light, were his instruments of terror, his enforcers, his collectors. They moved through the castle with a chilling efficiency, selecting their victims, dragging them away to fates Eloise could only imagine, and desperately tried not to. The screaming, she knew, was the prelude to something far worse, something unspeakable. She had seen the faces of the women who returned, hollowed out, their eyes vacant, their spirits broken. Some never returned at all. The rumors were rampant. Gilles de Rais, once the celebrated companion of Joan of Arc, had fallen into darkness. Some whispered of forbidden knowledge, of pacts made with demons, of rituals performed in the dead of night. Others spoke of madness, of a mind shattered by the horrors of war, seeking solace in the infliction of pain. Eloise didn't care for the explanations. She only knew the reality. This castle was a cage, and she was a prisoner, waiting for the day the Baron's gaze fell upon her. She tried to make herself invisible, to blend into the background, to become less than nothing. She avoided eye contact with the guards, she spoke only when spoken to, and even then, her voice was barely a whisper. She clung to the hope that she was too insignificant, too plain, to attract his attention. But hope was a fragile thing in Mashakul, easily crushed beneath the Baron's iron heel. The woman next to her, Marie, began to tremble, her body shaking violently. Marie had been at the castle for less than a week, and the fear was still raw in her eyes. Eloise reached out a hand, offering a silent gesture of comfort, but Marie flinched away, her gaze darting around the room, as if expecting the Baron's men to appear at any moment. "Don't," Marie whispered, her voice hoarse. "Don't touch me. It's bad luck." Eloise withdrew her hand, understanding. In Mashakul, even kindness could be interpreted as a transgression, a reason for punishment. They were all alone, each trapped in their own personal hell, unable to offer solace or support to one another. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that was even more terrifying. Eloise held her breath, waiting, listening for any sound that would indicate what had happened. But there was nothing, only the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images that threatened to overwhelm her. The blood-stained floors, the vacant stairs, the whispered stories of torture and depravity. She imagined herself back in her village, walking through the fields, the sun on her face, the scent of wildflowers in the air. She clung to these memories, these fragments of a life that seemed so distant now, as if they were the only things keeping her from succumbing to the madness that permeated Mashakul. But even these memories were fading, tainted by the ever-present shadow of the Baron. She knew that if she stayed here much longer, she would lose herself completely, become just another empty shell, another victim of the diabolical things that Gilles de Rais did to women inside his castle. And she would never see her mother again. The thought spurred her on, reigniting a spark of defiance within her. She had to escape. She had to find a way out of this nightmare before it consumed her entirely. But how? The castle was a fortress, surrounded by high walls and guarded by ruthless men. Every door, every window was a potential trap. Escape seemed impossible. Yet she knew she had to try. Her life, her sanity, depended on it. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with a newfound resolve. She would not let the Baron break her. She would not become another victim. She would fight, she would resist, she would do whatever it took to survive. She looked at Marie, her face still pale and trembling. Marie had been at the castle for less than a week, and the fear was still raw in her eyes. Eloise reached out a hand, offering a silent gesture of comfort. But Marie flinched away, her gaze darting around the room, as if expecting the Baron's men to appear at any moment. "Don't," Marie whispered, her voice hoarse. "Don't touch me. It's bad luck." Eloise withdrew her hand, understanding. In Machecoul, even kindness could be interpreted as a transgression, a reason for punishment. They were all alone, each trapped in their own personal hell, unable to offer solace or support to one another. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that was even more terrifying. Eloise held her breath, waiting, listening for any sound that would indicate what had happened. But there was nothing. Only the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images that threatened to overwhelm her. The blood-stained floors, the vacant stairs, the whispered stories of torture and depravity. She imagined herself back in her village, walking through the fields, the sun on her face, the scent of wildflowers in the air. She clung to these memories, these fragments of a life that seemed so distant now, as if they were the only things keeping her from succumbing to the madness that permeated Machecoul. But even these memories were fading, tainted by the ever-present shadow of the Baron. She knew that if she stayed here much longer, she would lose herself completely, become just another empty shell, another victim of the diabolical things that Gilles de Rais did to women inside his castle. And she would never see her mother again. The thought spurred her on, reigniting a spark of defiance within her. She had to escape. She had to find a way out of this nightmare before it consumed her entirely. But how? The castle was a fortress, surrounded by high walls and guarded by ruthless men. Every door, every window was a potential trap. Escape seemed impossible. Yet she knew she had to try. Her life, her sanity, depended on it. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with a newfound resolve. She would not let the Baron break her. She would not become another victim. She would fight. She would resist. She would do whatever it took to survive. She looked at Marie, her face still pale and trembling. Perhaps together they could find a way out. Perhaps together they could overcome the darkness that had engulfed Machecoul. But first, they had to survive the night. And the night was far from over. The rain continued to fall, a relentless torrent that seemed to mock their misery. Eloise closed her eyes again and began to pray. She hadn't prayed in a long time. She wasn't even sure who she was praying to. But in this place, in this darkness, she needed something to hold on to, even if it was just a sliver of hope. The cold seeped into Eloise's bones, a constant reminder of her captivity. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gray and bruised purple, offering little comfort. The castle remained cloaked in shadow, the stone walls glistening with moisture. The silence of the aftermath was heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient structure and the scurrying of rats within the walls. Eloise rose stiffly, her muscles aching from the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement. Marie remained huddled on the straw, her eyes wide and unfocused. Eloise knelt beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. "Marie, we need to get up. They'll be here soon." Marie didn't respond, her gaze fixed on some unseen horror. Eloise sighed. She couldn't afford to coddle Marie, but she couldn't leave her behind either. She had to find a way to rouse her, to bring her back to reality. "Marie, listen to me," Eloise said, her voice firm but gentle. "They will come for us. They will make us work, and if we don't, they will punish us. We have to be strong. We have to survive." The words seemed to penetrate Marie's daze. She blinked, her eyes focusing on Eloise's face. "Survive?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How? There's no escaping this place." "We have to try," Eloise insisted. "We have to find a way. We can't just give up." She helped Marie to her feet, supporting her weight as they walked towards the corner of the room where a small basin of water and a rough cloth were placed. They washed their faces, the cold water stinging their skin, a small act of defiance against the filth and despair that surrounded them. As they were washing, one of the guards appeared at the doorway, his face impassive. "Get to the kitchens," he barked, "now." He gestured with his whip, a silent threat that needed no further explanation. Eloise and Marie exchanged a look, then followed the guard out of the room. The kitchens were a chaotic hive of activity, filled with the clatter of pots and pans, the shouts of cooks, and the pungent odors of stale food and sweat. Eloise and Marie were assigned to scrubbing floors, a back-breaking task that seemed designed to break their spirits. But Eloise refused to be broken. As she scrubbed, she kept her eyes open, searching for any opportunity, any weakness in the castle's defenses. She noticed a loose stone in the wall, a crack in the floorboards, a window that wasn't properly latched. Small details, but details that could potentially be used to their advantage. She also observed the routines of the guards, their shift changes, their patrol routes. She learned their names, their habits, their weaknesses. Knowledge, she knew, was power. And in Machecal, power was the only thing that could save them. As the day wore on, Eloise began to formulate a plan. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger, but it was the only chance they had. She would need Marie's help, but she wasn't sure if Marie was strong enough to participate. After they had been working for some hours, she noticed a young girl, no older than 12, carrying a bucket of water across the kitchens. The girl stumbled, spilling the water on the floor. One of the cooks, a burly man with a greasy apron, flew into a rage, screaming at the girl and threatening to beat her. Eloise couldn't stand by and watch. She stepped forward, interposing herself between the cook and the girl. "Leave her alone," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "It was an accident." The cook glared at her, his face contorted with anger. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" he snarled. "I'm just saying she didn't do it on purpose," Eloise replied, trying to remain calm. "She's just a child." The cook raised his hand to strike her, but before he could, another cook intervened, pulling him away. "Leave it, John," he said. "It's not worth the trouble." John grumbled, but he backed down, muttering threats under his breath. Eloise turned to the girl, who was staring at her with wide, grateful eyes. "Are you all right?" Eloise asked. The girl nodded, unable to speak. "What's your name?" "John," she whispered. "Thank you," John said. "Thank you for helping me." "You're welcome," Eloise said. "Just be careful." The incident had not gone unnoticed. One of the Baron's men, a tall, gaunt figure with a cruel smile, had been watching from the shadows. He approached Eloise, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You have a kind heart," he said, "but kindness is a weakness in this place." Eloise didn't respond, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Don't worry," he said, "your kindness will be rewarded. The Baron appreciates those who are willing to help others." He turned and walked away, leaving Eloise to wonder what he meant. Was it a genuine compliment or a veiled threat? She didn't know, but she knew that she had to be careful. She had attracted attention to herself, and in Machecal, attention was rarely a good thing. Later that evening, after they had finished their work and returned to their makeshift dormitory, Eloise shared her plan with Marie. Marie listened in silence, her eyes widening with each detail.
When Eloise had finished, Marie shook her head. "It's too dangerous," she said. "We'll never get away with it. They'll catch us, and they'll punish us terribly." "I know it's dangerous," Eloise replied, "but we have to try. We can't stay here and wait to die." Marie hesitated, her face etched with fear. I don't know if I can do it," she said. "I'm too scared." Eloise took Marie's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I'll be with you," she said. "We'll do it together. We'll get through this." She could feel Marie trembling, but she also sensed a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Okay," Marie said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I'll try." Eloise smiled, a small, fragile smile. It was a start. They had a plan, and they had each other. Now, all they had to do was put it into action. But first, they had to survive another night in the shadows of Machecal. The echoes in stone seemed to whisper warnings, reminding them of the Baron's power, of the diabolical things he was capable of. But Eloise refused to be deterred. She had a plan, and she had a purpose. She would not let fear consume her. She would fight for her freedom, for her life, and for the lives of the other women trapped in this hellhole. And she would not rest until she had escaped the diabolical clutches of Gilles de Rais. She would find a way. She had to.
The plan was simple in its grim effectiveness. It relied on exploiting the castle's labyrinthine layout and the guards' predictable routines, combined with the element of surprise. Eloise had spent the previous day meticulously observing the castle, memorizing the locations of key points and the timing of guard patrols. Their escape would begin during the changing of the guard, a period of controlled chaos when security was at its weakest. They would slip away from the kitchens, using the network of narrow corridors and hidden passages that Eloise had discovered. Their destination was the old servants' quarters, a dilapidated section of the castle that had been abandoned years ago. From there, they would attempt to scale the outer walls under the cover of darkness, using a makeshift rope crafted from stolen bedsheets. The most dangerous part of the plan involved navigating the Baron's private chambers. Eloise had learned that the Baron often retired to his chambers late at night, accompanied by a select few of his men. She suspected that these chambers were the site of the diabolical rituals that were rumored to take place within the castle. The women would have to pass near these chambers, but they would have to be extremely careful to avoid being detected. That night, as the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the castle walls, Eloise and Marie prepared to put their plan into action. They had managed to steal a small knife from the kitchens, which Eloise concealed beneath her tattered dress. They had also gathered a few scraps of food and a flask of water, enough to sustain them for a few days if they managed to escape. They waited until the changing of the guard began, listening for the signal that would tell them it was time to move. The signal came in the form of a loud commotion in the courtyard, a shouting match between two of the guards. Eloise grabbed Marie's hand and pulled her toward the nearest corridor. They moved quickly and silently, their hearts pounding in their chests. The corridor was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. They passed several doors, each one a potential source of danger. They pressed on, their footsteps echoing softly in the silence. They reached the entrance to the old servants' quarters, a crumbling archway that led into a maze of dilapidated rooms and corridors. The quarters were even more desolate than Eloise had imagined. The walls were covered in graffiti. The floors were littered with debris, and the air was heavy with the stench of rats and rot. But it was also deserted, which was exactly what they needed. They found a relatively safe room and barricaded the door with a pile of rubble. They took a moment to catch their breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. "We're doing it," Eloise whispered. "We're actually doing it." Marie nodded, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I can't believe we've made it this far," she said. "But the hardest part is still to come." Eloise knew she was right. The Baron's chambers were the most dangerous obstacle in their path. They rested for a few hours, conserving their energy for the next stage of their escape. As they waited, Eloise couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept hearing noises in the distance, whispers and footsteps that seemed to be getting closer.
She knew that the Baron's men were constantly patrolling the castle, searching for any sign of rebellion. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. When the moon reached its zenith, Eloise decided that it was time to move. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. They carefully removed the barricade from the door and slipped back into the corridor. They moved with even greater caution than before, their senses on high alert. They reached the corridor that led to the Baron's chambers. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, a palpable sense of evil. Eloise could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. They crept along the corridor, hugging the shadows, their eyes darting from side to side. They passed several doors, each one a potential gateway to hell. They could hear voices coming from behind one of the doors, muffled but distinct. They paused, listening intently. "The ritual must be completed," a voice said, a deep, guttural voice that sent shivers down Eloise's spine. "The Baron demands it." "But the girl is too young," another voice replied, a hesitant, frightened voice. "She won't survive." "The Baron doesn't care," the first voice said. "He wants her blood. He wants her soul." Eloise exchanged a look with Marie. They knew what was happening behind that door. They knew that the Baron was about to commit another unspeakable act. They had to do something. Eloise reached for the knife hidden beneath her dress. She had to stop him, even if it meant sacrificing her own life. She was about to burst through the door when Marie grabbed her arm. "No," Marie whispered. "We can't. We have to get out of here. We can't save her." Eloise hesitated, torn between her desire to help and her need to escape. She knew that Marie was right. They couldn't save the girl. They would only get themselves killed. But the thought of leaving her to the Baron's mercy was unbearable. With a heavy heart, Eloise made her decision. She lowered the knife and nodded to Marie. They had to keep moving. They crept past the door, their footsteps barely audible. They reached the end of the corridor and turned towards the outer walls. They could see the moonlight streaming through a broken window, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They quickened their pace, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They reached the window and peered out. The outer walls were tall and imposing, but Eloise had spotted a section where the stone was crumbling, creating a series of handholds. It would be a difficult climb, but it was their only chance. They tied the makeshift rope to a sturdy beam and threw it out the window. The rope landed safely on the other side of the wall. Eloise took a deep breath and began to climb. Her muscles strained with the effort, but she refused to give up. She reached the top of the wall and pulled herself over. She turned to help Marie, who was struggling to climb. Marie was halfway up when they heard a shout from below. "They're escaping!" one of the guards yelled. "Stop them!" Eloise pulled Marie over the wall just as the guards reached the window. They were trapped. They had no choice but to jump. They leapt from the wall, landing on the ground with a bone-jarring thud. They scrambled to their feet and ran towards the forest, their pursuers hot on their heels. The serpent's lair had nearly claimed them, but they had escaped. For now. But the Baron's reach was long, and his vengeance would be swift. Their escape was only the beginning of their fight for survival.
The forest offered little solace. The undergrowth snagged at their clothes, the branches clawed at their faces, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. They ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline and the primal instinct to survive. Behind them, they could hear the shouts of the guards, growing fainter but still present, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Eloise led the way, her instincts guiding her through the tangled wilderness. She knew that they couldn't outrun the guards forever. They needed to find a place to hide, a place where they could rest and regroup. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a small cave, hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy. It was damp and musty, but it offered a degree of shelter from the elements and a place to catch their breath. They collapsed inside, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. Marie was gasping for air, her face pale and drawn. Eloise checked her for injuries, finding only minor cuts and bruises. They shared the remaining scraps of food and water, rationing it carefully. "We need to get away from here," Marie said, her voice weak. "They'll be searching for us." "I know," Eloise replied, "but we can't go any further tonight. We need to rest. We'll leave at first light." They huddled together for warmth, trying to ignore the cold and the fear that gnawed at their insides. Eloise couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing, replaying the events of the night. She kept thinking about the girl they had left behind, the girl who was now at the mercy of the Baron. She felt a pang of guilt, but she knew that there was nothing she could have done. Saving herself and Marie was the only thing that mattered. As dawn approached, Eloise woke Marie and prepared to leave the cave. They ventured out into the forest, their senses on high alert. They walked for hours, following the course of a small stream. They avoided the main roads, sticking to the less traveled paths and hidden trails. They knew that the Baron's men would be watching for them, but they hoped to blend in with the local population. As they traveled, they encountered other refugees, people who had fled their homes to escape the Baron's tyranny. They heard whispers of rebellion, of farmers and villagers who were banding together to resist the Baron's rule. Eloise felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they weren't alone in their fight. Perhaps there was a chance to overthrow the Baron and bring justice to Machecoul. They met an old woman named Agnes, who had been forced to flee her village after her son was accused of treason. Agnes told them stories of the Baron's cruelty, of the tortures he inflicted on his victims, of the diabolical rituals he performed in his castle. The stories were even more horrifying than the rumors Eloise had heard. Agnes warned them to stay away from Machecoul, to never return to the Baron's domain. She told them that the Baron was a monster, a demon in human form, and that he would stop at nothing to maintain his power. Despite the danger, Eloise felt drawn back to Machecoul. She couldn't forget the women who were still trapped in the castle, the women who were suffering at the hands of the Baron. She knew that she had to do something to help them. She decided to seek out the rebels, to join their cause and fight against the Baron. She told Marie about her plan, and Marie agreed to join her. They found the rebel camp hidden deep within the forest. The camp was a makeshift village, a collection of tents and huts built around a central clearing. The rebels were a ragtag group, armed with pitchforks, axes, and a few rusty swords. Their leader was a former soldier named Jean-Luc, a hardened veteran who had deserted the Baron's army after witnessing his atrocities. Jean-Luc welcomed Eloise and Marie into the camp, impressed by their courage and their determination. He told them about the rebels' plans to attack Machecoul, to storm the castle and overthrow the Baron. The plan was audacious, but it was their only hope. Eloise and Marie joined the rebels, learning how to fight and defend themselves. Eloise's knowledge of the castle's layout proved invaluable, helping the rebels to plan their attack. She told them about the secret passages, the hidden entrances, and the weaknesses in the castle's defenses. She also warned them about the Baron's men, their numbers, and their tactics. As they prepared for the attack, Eloise felt a growing sense of purpose. She was no longer just a victim, a prisoner of the Baron's cruelty. She was a warrior, a rebel, a fighter for justice. She was determined to avenge the women who had suffered at the hands of the Baron, to bring him to justice and to liberate Machecoul. They met an old woman named Agnes, who had been forced to flee her village after her son was accused of treason. Agnes told them stories of the Baron's cruelty, of the tortures he inflicted on his victims, of the diabolical rituals he performed in his castle. The stories were even more horrifying than the rumors Eloise had heard. Agnes warned them to stay away from Machecoul, to never return to the Baron's domain. She told them that the Baron was a monster, a demon in human form, and that he would stop at nothing to maintain his power. Despite the danger, Eloise felt drawn back to Machecoul. She couldn't forget the women who were still trapped in the castle, the women who were suffering at the hands of the Baron. She knew that she had to do something to help them. She decided to seek out the rebels, to join their cause and fight against the Baron. She told Marie about her plan, and Marie agreed to join her. They found the rebel camp hidden deep within the forest. The camp was a makeshift village, a collection of tents and huts built around a central clearing. The rebels were a ragtag group, armed with pitchforks, axes, and a few rusty swords. Their leader was a former soldier named Jean-Luc, a hardened veteran who had deserted the Baron's army after witnessing his atrocities. Jean-Luc welcomed Eloise and Marie into the camp, impressed by their courage and their determination. He told them about the rebels' plans to attack Machecoul, to storm the castle and overthrow the Baron. The plan was audacious, but it was their only hope. Eloise and Marie joined the rebels, learning how to fight and defend themselves. Eloise's knowledge of the castle's layout proved invaluable, helping the rebels to plan their attack. She told them about the secret passages, the hidden entrances, and the weaknesses in the castle's defenses. She also warned them about the Baron's men, their numbers, and their tactics. As they prepared for the attack, Eloise felt a growing sense of purpose. She was no longer just a victim, a prisoner of the Baron's cruelty. She was a warrior, a rebel, a fighter for justice. She was determined to avenge the women who had suffered at the hands of the Baron, to bring him to justice and to liberate Machecoul from his tyranny. The day of the attack arrived, shrouded in mist and uncertainty. The rebels marched towards Machecoul, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, but they were prepared to fight to the death. Eloise and Marie marched along with them, their eyes fixed on the castle in the distance. The diabolical things that Gilles de Rais had done to women inside his castle would not go unpunished. The whispers of rebellion were about to become a roar.
The assault on Machecoul was a desperate gamble. The rebels, though fueled by righteous anger, were outnumbered and outmatched by the Baron's well-trained soldiers. Jean-Luc, a pragmatist hardened by years of warfare, knew their chances were slim, but the simmering rage of the peasantry demanded action. He hoped that Eloise's knowledge of the castle would give them an edge, a way to bypass the heavily fortified main gates and infiltrate the stronghold. As they approached the castle walls, the rebels unleashed a barrage of arrows and stones, a futile attempt to suppress the defenders. The Baron's men responded with a volley of their own, sending the rebels scrambling for cover. Eloise, along with a small group of rebels, followed Jean-Luc towards a hidden entrance that she had discovered during her captivity. The entrance, a narrow passage concealed behind a crumbling section of the outer wall, led to a network of underground tunnels that snaked beneath the castle. The tunnels were dark and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Eloise led the way, her memory guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. They encountered a few guards along the way, but they were easily dispatched. Jean-Luc's battle-hardened rebels efficiently silenced any resistance. As they neared the heart of the castle, they could hear the sounds of fighting above them, the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, and the roar of the battle. They emerged from the tunnels into a deserted courtyard, the main battle raging on the opposite side of the castle. Eloise knew that they had to find the Baron, to end his reign of terror once and for all. She led the rebels towards his private chambers, the site of so many unspeakable atrocities. They stormed the chambers, finding them eerily empty. The air was heavy with a sense of dread, as if the walls themselves were stained with the Baron's evil. Eloise searched frantically for the Baron, her heart pounding with anticipation. Suddenly, a door opened, and Gilles de Rais emerged, his eyes blazing with madness. "So," the Baron sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, "the rats have finally come out of their holes." He raised his hand, signaling his guards to attack. The rebels charged forward, their makeshift weapons clashing against the Baron's soldiers. Eloise fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, her anger fueling her every move. She dodged and weaved, her small knife a surprisingly effective weapon.
She managed to wound several of the guards, but she knew that they were outmatched. Jean-Luc, a whirlwind of steel and fury, cut down several of the Baron's men, but he was eventually overwhelmed by their numbers. He fell to the ground, mortally wounded. Seeing Jean-Luc fall, Eloise felt a surge of rage. She lunged at the Baron, her knife aimed at his heart. But the Baron was too quick. He sidestepped her attack and struck her across the face with his sword. Eloise fell to the ground, her vision blurring. The Baron stood over her, his eyes filled with triumph. "You cannot defeat me," he said, his voice a low growl. "I am invincible." But as he spoke, Marie appeared behind him, a stolen axe raised high above her head. Marie, who had seemed so fragile and timid throughout her captivity, had found strength in her desire for revenge. She brought the axe down with all her might, striking the Baron in the back of the head. The Baron crumpled to the ground, his body convulsing. The remaining guards, seeing their master fall, lost their will to fight. They dropped their weapons and fled, leaving Eloise and Marie alone with the Baron's lifeless body. Eloise slowly rose to her feet, her face covered in blood. She looked at Marie, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," she said, her voice hoarse. "We finally did it." Marie nodded, her face streaked with tears. "We're free," she said. The news of the Baron's death spread quickly throughout the castle. The remaining rebels, emboldened by their victory, stormed the main gates and routed the remaining defenders. The women who had been imprisoned in the castle were liberated, their faces filled with joy and relief. Machecoul was free. In the aftermath of the battle, Eloise and Marie helped to rebuild the shattered community. They cared for the wounded, buried the dead, and established a new government, one that was based on justice and equality. Eloise never forgot the diabolical things that Gilles de Rais had done to women inside his castle. She dedicated her life to ensuring that such atrocities would never happen again. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of the human spirit. The story of her bravery and determination was passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a better future. As for Marie, she found peace in helping others, her experiences making her a strong and compassionate leader. Machecoul, once a symbol of terror and despair, became a beacon of freedom and justice, a testament to the courage of the women who had dared to resist the Baron's tyranny. And so, the diabolical things that Gilles de Rais did to women inside his castle, though forever etched in the history of Machecoul, were ultimately overshadowed by the triumph of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the unwavering determination to create a world where such horrors would never again occur. The whispers of rebellion had become a thunderous roar, silencing the Baron's evil forever.